Do you ever find yourself overwhelmed as an entrepreneur? Maybe your attention is pulled between your business over here, your family over here. You've got continuing education or a graduate degree. You've got community projects you're involved with. And no matter what you do, it seems like there's never quite enough time, never quite enough energy. There's always something yet to be done. Something is clamoring for your attention. Now, if that's the case for you, I think you're going to find that this video is of tremendous value. So, to put this in context, you have goals, right? And you're able to learn from your mistakes. I hope so. Now, the reason why I check in with that is that this means that you are an example of what we could call a cybernetic system. Now, that might sound very technical at first pass, but I promise it's actually much simpler than it may seem. A cybernetic system is defined by three aspects. It has a goal or goals. It has a representation of its current state with respect to those goals. And it has a set of actions it can take to close the gap between its current state and its desired state. Now, the really valuable thing about this model is that it gives us a pretty clear definition of some things that in the world of mindset and mental health can be a little squishy at times, to put it lightly. So we can consider well-being on the one hand to be your ability to achieve the goals that matter to you, your ability to fulfill the values that are important to you, to achieve the goals that are important to you, to attain the possessions that are important to you. And to the extent that you do that, you're going to experience positive feeling. Actually, all positive feeling that we ever experience derives from the movement toward or the achievement of goals that are important to us. Now, to the extent that you fail to do that, you're going to suffer. There's this beautiful model, the Cybernetics of Psychopathology, developed by Colin DeYoung. I'll link to that down below if I remember. So anyway, in the cybernetic model of psychopathology, basically they operationalize suffering. And he says basically this: suffering is a persistent failure to achieve these goals due to an inability to update our goals, our representations, or our actions when any of those have proven unsuccessful. So basically, if you are getting consistent feedback that what you're doing isn't working, and you are not fulfilling on the goals that are important to you, you're going to experience negative affect, negative feeling, generally speaking. So well-being is getting and keeping what you want. And I make sure to add in getting and keeping, because it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to get the thing if you then lose it, right? So we want to get and keep what we're after. And on the flip side, suffering is a persistent failure to get and keep what we're after. So with that in mind, I'm willing to bet that you have at least some idea of what you're after. And in order to make the most of this video, I'm going to encourage you to have something handy nearby to write with. I'm actually just going to talk you through some basic ideas that you can use, and it might take a little bit of journaling, a little bit of reflecting. So for the time being, I'd like you to consider, forget what I'd like, I encourage you to consider, what are the goals that are actually important to you? And you might think in some of the big domains of life. You have goals for your business, of course. You have goals for your relationships, I would imagine. And you have goals for what? Your health, your well-being. And again, the ways that you slice and dice your life might mean that you have community projects, you have your health, you have your relationships, you have whatever the case is. Don't get too caught in the weeds on this one. Consider for the big domains of your life, what are the goals that you're looking to achieve? Now, I'm going to encourage you to actually consider this in a very specific way. And the reason why I do this is that we, as entrepreneurs, we are, oh boy, how do I put this nicely? We are subject to fantasy in a way that maybe other people aren't, but we can easily get caught up with the pie in the sky idealistic vision. Um, our fantasy engine runs wild, and we can just get caught in the grips of these, daydreams, let's say. So as you consider your goals, I'll encourage you to consider them from the minimum criteria for their fulfillment, which is to say, what's the low bar of good enough in any particular domain? So for your business, I am sure that you wouldn't say no to $1 billion, right? But is that necessary for the fulfillment of enough money in your life? So what is the minimum amount of profit you need to pull from the business and pay yourself in order to say this is good enough? You might also consider for your relationships. What is, I don't know, enough quality time with your loved ones? Now, sure, would you love to be blissed out and doing all of it? Yeah, obviously. But what's good enough quality time? Likewise, if you have particular health goals, maybe you have a weight loss goal in mind, a strength goal in mind, you have some flexibility measure you'd like to hit. What is good enough for each of those things? If you want to, I don't know, get up to squatting double body weight or getting your body fat percentage down to, I don't know, 10% or whatever the case is, what's good enough? Now, the reason why I'm going to encourage you to focus on the minimum criteria for fulfillment on these things is that if you're already overwhelmed, we don't want to do more than is strictly necessary. Like, if it's good enough, it's good enough, right? The reason, however, many people get caught with the sense that nothing they ever do is good enough, in large part is because they've never defined what is good enough. So if you can hurdle that low bar of what's good enough, anything above that, it's just extra credit. Like, sure, if you bring in more money, wonderful. But if you're at good enough and more money actually impinges on your ability to fulfill on other goals in your life, well, that's not so good. So consider what's good enough. Again, the minimum criteria for you to look at this particular goal and say, yeah, I achieved that. Now, when you've clarified that, let's do a little gut hunch check-in here. As you look over each of those things that you've written out, how are you doing currently with respect to that? What I often find, and what surprises many clients, is that they're actually either already accomplishing the thing and they just hadn't really realized it, partly because they haven't defined it, or if they haven't already fulfilled it, they're much closer than they thought at first. So you may look down at this and think, well, actually I'm good. In which case, close out the tab and carry on with the rest of your day and enjoy life by all means. There's plenty of life to be enjoyed outside of watching content on the internet. But anyway, so how are you doing with respect to those things? Now, as you look over that, you may find that you've achieved it, you're much closer than you thought, or maybe actually now that you've specified this, there is a huge gap. That's okay, but we do want to know what we're working with, because your ability as a cybernetic system to achieve those goals depends in part on your representation of where you are with respect to where you're going. It's that relationship that's going to determine the actions you take to get from here to there. So, with these minimum criteria defined, let's take this a step further. For each of these domains, now that you have a sense of where you are with respect to where you'd like to be, what is the least amount of effort you can put into this thing to prevent it from backsliding? Now, the reason why this is important is that if you haven't noticed, things fall apart on their own. There are infinitely more ways for entropy to take hold of things and create chaos in our lives and bring things into a state of disarray. The dishes are going to get dirty. There's going to be ivy growing on the building. There's going to be all sorts of ways. Oh, a little pop up here. There's going to be all sorts of ways that things fall apart. So it's going to take some effort to keep things at least as they are now. Now, this might actually be much less effort than you think. So it's worth thinking about, what is the least amount of effort required to keep things running along as is? Because as you go about improving your performance in these different areas, we want to make sure that it's not at the expense of something else. This is how progressively your life gets better and better in kind of every possible way. Seems to be the case, at least. So maybe you find, for example, that as you consider the relationships in your life, the important people in your life, your loved ones, maybe you find that, well, if I want to keep things as is, I've got to have at least one date night a week with Bae, significant other, whomever. We've got to have an hour and a half to talk about the relationship itself. So we've got to have the quality time. We've got to have the time to talk about the relationship. I've got to have an hour a week to talk with my best friend. I've got to, I don't know, go out dancing on the weekend, whatever the case is. I don't know what your minima are. I'm just kind of pulling at things that are salient in my life. So consider what's the least amount of work required to sustain things as is. Again, for health, maybe it's you get to the gym twice a week and you're not going to see dramatic improvements, but things aren't going to fall apart. Maybe you go for a walk for 20 minutes a day. In your business, maybe it's you are, I don't know, creating content 2-3 times a week. You are having a team meeting every Monday morning. You are taking 5 sales calls, 10 sales calls, whatever the case is. You know, based on having lived your life for longer than I've lived your life, you know what's involved in keeping things as is. Here's why this is so important. As I mentioned again, we're going to do our best to make sure that you're not backsliding in any of these areas. And once you've figured out the minimum amount of effort required to keep things as is, we're going to take a look at this system that is your life. And we're going to see which one of these big domains is actually the least reliable. Which of these things is not quite carrying its weight? Or which of these is contributing the most stress that's bleeding out and affecting the other areas? There's a general principle that can be quite helpful to know of system reliability. First came across this in, oh God, what was it? Filters Against Folly by a guy named Garrett Hardin, I believe. He's a human ecologist. I don't know, I think Stanford or one of those big fancy sounding places. So anyway, system reliability says that the overall reliability of a system is the product of the reliability of its component parts. So for example, if I have paid my electric bill 90% of the time, and my light switch works 90% of the time, the overall reliability of this system is only 81%. You multiply the 0.9 of 90% paying the electric bill, multiply that by 0.9 of the 90% reliability of the light switch, and the total system, the lights are only going to come on 81% of the time. Now, if we add in another element that isn't strictly necessary to the system, we're going to find that even if it's as reliable as the other parts, if it's 90% reliable as well, let's say I've got a 90% reliable light switch flipper. I'm not satisfied with 81%, so I get my 90% reliable light switch flipper. Well, I have to multiply 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9. That gets us to 72% reliability. So that's not so good. We don't want to go looking to add a bunch of things that aren't essential for the overall system that is our lives. What we want to do is improve the least reliable elements, because in doing that, we're going to increase the reliability of the system overall. If I pay my electric bill 100% of the time, and my light switch is still only 90% reliable, well, in that two-component system, I've gone from 81% reliable, 0.9 times 0.9, to 90% reliable, 100 times 0.9. And that's pretty good. An increase in 9% reliability, it's not something to sneeze at. Do people even say that anymore? I don't know where that came from. Oh, well, there it is, out on the internet now. So anyway, in these big domains of your life, which of these things is contributing to the greatest stress? And when you've defined the minimum amount of effort required to keep everything else from falling apart, you can do that minimum effort and then give this least reliable thing everything you've got to make it more reliable. Now, this hopefully begins to take this big cloud, this undifferentiated mass of overwhelm, and hopefully it helps define the minimum actions needed to keep order in the kingdom. And it helps you prioritize the thing that is going to make the biggest difference in the rest of your life as a whole. Now, given that I don't know the specifics of that thing in your case, I am reluctant to go too much further with this. But hopefully, as a first pass, this gives you at least some way to begin zooming out of the cloud of overwhelm, getting a better lay of the land, and figuring out what are the minimum actions required to have things running smoothly in your life, and the thing that is worth the utmost of your attention from now until you make it more reliable. Of course, when you improve that one thing, then you can zoom out, survey the landscape again, and maybe you find that, hey, now I want to get my health in better shape. Now that I got my business dialed in, or now I want to get my relationship sorted. So you focus on one, maintaining the others, you focus on another, maintaining the others, you focus on another, and gradually everything gets better and better and better. So I hope you find this of some use. Now, to do you a favor and to do me a favor, I'm going to ask you to do one thing, and that is to think back over everything that you've heard in this video and clarify for yourself, what is the difference that made a difference? We could consider that this is a whole bunch of nice sounding ideas, but I imagine there's one specific thing that for you, based on the context in which you find yourself now, there's one thing that really made a difference. What is that one thing? What's that difference that made a difference? If you can give a little time to think through that now, this is going to help you consolidate what you've learned and actually increase the odds that you then go and apply it. And if you'd like to go just a little bit further with it, I'll encourage you to type that difference that made a difference in the comments down below. That helps me get a sense of how to communicate this stuff more effectively. It also increases the odds that other people who could benefit from this are going to see it. At least I think that's how these things work. I don't actually know for sure, but it seems reasonable. So I hope that's of some use. I would love to hear the difference that made a difference for you. And with that, I'll leave it.